is week 17. You may not be lucky enough to be sweating out the championship, but the good folks at Fantasy Game Day, of course, have got some superb DFS action. It's not just the Thursday night. We had the Christmas Day slate. We've got Saturday premium slate. There's, of course, the Sunday Stars, which we are going to be previewing for you right now. If you haven't checked out Fantasy Game Day, it is the best and brightest new DFS app. Only for UK listeners, you can use code TFS23 for a free second entry when you deposit. Tom, have you had some fun over Christmas playing all the different games, all the different options you could on Fantasy Game Day?
Yeah, somehow I managed to lose money with the Ravens completely dominating, had all the right pieces and all the right lineups, but in a very well contested contest, didn't quite put it all together. So, yeah, I always like these small slates. The 3-game slate tomorrow particularly looks really interesting with the Chargers at New England. I think we're going to get J.K. Dobbins at a nice price. You've got then the Bengals, who people might be a bit worried about stacking against the Broncos, but I'd still be fine with that. And then the creme de la creme, the Cardinals against the Rams, one which we've talked about, I really want to lean into. So lots to like tomorrow, and then quite a fun but tricky slate on Sunday. And I think where there's trickiness, it just breeds opportunity for those who are willing to lead into that ambiguity.
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly when it comes to some of the quarterback picks, I think you need to hold your nose and dive in a little bit. There's some pretty disgusting options you're going to have to go. But as you said, be comfortable being uncomfortable, if whatever the phrase is that I've completely butchered there. But let's dive into the Sunday Stars slate and talk some captain picks. Tom, it feels like every week we sort of say the obvious options are the running backs, but maybe there's some wide receiver options. Is it a running back week, a wide receiver week for you this week, or are you just going to play it safe?
Sadly, I think it's a running back week, which, it's not what I want to say. But I think particularly when you look at the top of the slate, it's hard to ignore Saquon Barkley, who will be playing without Jalen Hurts, 8,200 this week, and goes up against a Cowboys team that have allowed, a huge amount of fantasy points to the running back position this year. They've allowed the 10th most. They rank 28th in run defense DVOA. They've really struggled. And Saquon Barkley has just been excellent. You go back through his game logs since week 9, and he has 199 total yards, 78 total yards, 198, 302, 117, 124, 74, and 150. Now, obviously, those down weeks aren't what you want, but he's been brilliant. He has fallen by the wayside in MVP voting now because Lamar and Allen are playing so well. But Barkley could absolutely bring himself back into it with a massive game here. Now, last week, Kenny Pickett absolutely latched on to AJ Brown. If that happens again here, maybe it'll be difficult for Saquon Barkley to truly get home at 8,200. It is a very expensive play, but I don't see any reason why you don't want to start building with that and try and see what the lineups look like.
Yeah, and I think there's also the element of, look, Saquon Barkley's chasing that 2,000 yard. He's chasing the rushing title. I think the Eagles are going to want to feed him the ball, and we've known all year how you get after the Cowboys' defense is on the ground. So, yeah, very intrigued to see if he could just be loaded up and get a huge amount of volume. The other guy, he's my highest projected player on the week. He's priced relatively cheaply at 7,600. Devon Chain, it feels like he's kind of a must start in a week where there's not a huge amount of expensive options that you particularly want to get into lineups. So could you see a world where maybe you go Barkley and a chain double?
I've not tried that yet. I like the idea of it. I think you probably end up having to punt 2 tight ends to do that and reflect in the tight end position and go really cheap on the tight end position to be able to maybe do it. Otherwise, it's going to be quite a struggle. Maybe there's some running backs down close to that you could get to. And then you're probably going to have to live in the mid-range wide receivers, which could be tricky because there's some good mid to high end wide receivers for this week. You definitely have to be looking at a cheap stack, which we can get to in a bit. But Achane coming off his second 30-plus point game of the year. The Browns, you've been able to run on them this year. They rank 17th against the run. They've been fairly good against that compared with wide receivers and tight ends, where they've given up much more fantasy production. But Achan does most of his damage in the pass catching role anyway. He's regressed from 7.8 yards per carry last year down to 4.1 this year, which is kind of just about okay. But it's never really been impressive. So I do like Achan. I think that you can absolutely get after this Cleveland team, and particularly with them starting Dorian Thompson Robinson, this game could get out of hand, and Achan can rack up the numbers.
Yeah, absolutely. And we talked about at the beginning attacking this lineup. I think stacks are going to be really important. I think how you build that stack into your lineup with the quarterback position being slightly disgusting, shall we say, on this Sunday slate, I think it's going to be key. Some of the stacks we're looking at, Tom, you texted me and said Bucks Raiders is one you absolutely want to talk about. Is it as simple as Baker, Mike Evans with the Brock Bowers bring back, or are you looking to build it out more than that?
Well, it's Bucks are the main team, which I'm interested in. Obviously, the Raiders are playing in a different game, but the Bucks playing against the Panthers. We've got Mike Evans chasing down that 1,000-yard season for the 11th straight season. So I think you can really lean heavily into Baker Mayfield, Mike Evans on that side of it. I think a lot of people are going to want to play Bucky Irving. So having a bit of leverage away to Baker Mayfield and Mike Evans. Baker didn't play great last time these two teams met. He didn't have a huge amount of fantasy production. The Panthers' defensive line was really getting after him. But I fancy him to bounce back here because it's back in Tampa Bay. Tampa are kind of in control of their own destiny for the playoffs, and they need the win. And I just think that there's plenty of sneaky upside on this one. If I was going to go with a bring back, I think I'd probably lean Adam Thielen on this one. And then for the Raiders game, that's absolutely one which I'm very much willing to lean into. They're playing at New Orleans, and it just feels like you can do what you like against the Saints at the minute. Spencer Rattler completed 48% of his passes over the last two games. Brock Bowers is four catches away from tying Puka Nakua's rookie record for receptions, and 5 obviously away from breaking it, which is absurd for a rookie tight end.
Yeah, absolutely. Very interesting there. And then I said it's disgusting at quarterback. Kenny Pickett, Tom, is really intriguing to me. Tell me I've got an issue. I just can't believe there's a world where you can have an AJ Brown stack for £11,200. Is this getting too cute? Is this getting ridiculous? Or could you see a world where Kenny Pickett could maybe put up 15, 16 points and offer some really, really good return on investment?
It's possible. I mean, obviously, Kenny Pickett last week wasn't incredible for fantasy production on him. He only scored 9 fantasy points. But the thing that he did, the thing that we've talked about on the main preview show, was that he latched onto AJ Brown and just became hyper focused. He targeted AJ Brown on 13 of his 24 pass attempts, 54% target share. That is an absurd number, one of the highest of the season that we've seen. And AJ Brown must have been absolutely over the moon with it, because we've seen how much AJ Brown has wanted feeding this year. So I really like this one. You can pass on the Cowboys. They've been a defense that's been struggling against both the pass and the run this year. When you look at what the Cowboys do well, it's kind of hard to find it. They allow the 9th most fantasy points to the wide receiver position. They rank 19th against the pass in DVOA. And I feel like, AJ Brown could have a monster week this week. And that's probably the biggest way to gain leverage on Saquon Barkley captains.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just feel like Kenny Pickett, a week of practice, a game plan being built for him. We saw he, got 9 points in spot duty. Maybe he can carve out a bigger production this week. And at 4,200, he doesn't have to have a massive week in order to return on that investment. It's not just about the stacks, though. We got some favorite plays we'll line up this week. Tom, some of these are your key players you're going to be slotting into lineups. We're going to start with Jerome Ford. What is it about Jerome Ford you're excited about this week?
So Jerome Ford's been RB9 in consecutive weeks ever since the Nick Chubb injury. He's had over 100 total yards in both those games. Now, obviously, last week he had 66 yards on that opening play, and then it wasn't as explosive for the rest of the game. But the Dolphins, they ranked 24th against the run. They've allowed 6 games over 17 PPR points this year to running backs, including most recently in week 13 to Josh Jacobs. Jerome Ford saw a 72% opportunity share last week in week 16. And with David Njoku ruled out, There's just fewer options. Dorian Thompson Robinson is not an NFL caliber quarterback, cannot pass the ball. I think we've got to run, really.
Yeah, absolutely. It feels like any hope the Browns have got of moving the football rests solely on Jerome Ford's shoulders. And I'm not worried about this Dolphins defense, really. They're pretty weak up the middle, and I think you can definitely get after them in the ground game. Another player that you wanted to talk about, I'll be honest, I don't like him this week. I think he's overpriced at 4,200. I think it's expensive for a low ceiling play. I would rather either pay up for a better option or go cheaper for a player that I think has got a similar ceiling. So Tom, sell me on why this week Alexander Madison should be finding his way into my lineups.
So it's definitely not a play where you're going to be overly excited about it. But Alexander Mattison's had 4 games this year over 15 PPR points. We talked last week about how if the game script stayed neutral, then Alexander Mattison had a better chance to pay off than Amir Abdullah, who in the previous week saw way more touches. But last week it did pay off, and now you've got Mattison going against the Saints, who have really struggled against the run this year. They ranked 28th in run defense. Abdullah saw 7 rush attempts to Mattison's 12 last week. The Saints have allowed 5th most running back fantasy points. Spencer Rattler can't move the ball. The defense is packed up for the year. And I just think that Alexander Mattison is going to see decent volume. And I think that the team has a level of trust in him, which, even though Amir Abdullah has been really good in the receiving game and has been explosive, I don't think that trust extends as much to him as it does to Mattison.
There we go. Maybe he can find his way into one lineup, Tom, just for you. We're going to move on to some key enablers this week, though. Looking at the slate, looking at my projections, there's no like one absolute slam dunk must play enabler that's at cheap price that can open up the lineup. But there's about 6 or 7 guys that I kind of like, which always makes me nervous because it feels like whoever I'm going to pick is probably going to be the one that doesn't go off. Is there any way you would approach this? Is it a case of trying to put different ones in every lineup if you're building multiple? How are you picking as to which ones you want to slot in?
I think when I'm not confident about the cheap plays, I just try to correlate them, whether that's adding them to the stack that I've got with the quarterback or whether that's as a bring back. Saying we're making a bet on this game environment already, so let's lean into that bet and hope that it pays off in a bigger way.
Yeah, okay, makes sense. Well, we'll start at the top. Kundre Miller. Now, this is the guy when you talk about Alexander Mattison. I'd rather save myself £1,400 and go with Kundre Miller. I think they've got similar volume play. I think they've got similar issues in the passing game. I think they've got similar touchdown equity. But I'm saving £1,400. That is why I'm excited about Miller. Can you get on board with that one or not?
Yeah, I can. I think the main reason I'm not as on board is because I have more faith in the Vegas offense than I do the Saints offense. But like Kendre Miller averaged 5.1 yards per carry last week in week 16. If it wasn't for the fact that the Saints got blown out so quickly by the Packers and, were down by 30 points quite quickly, then Kendre Miller probably could have had a nice game. So I don't mind him. I think he's got a better chance against the Raiders than he did against the Packers. The Raiders are a team who, they're quite a funny team in terms of what they give up to various positions. They're not necessarily bad against anything. They're just kind of middling. Like they rank 25th in run defense DVOA, which is one of their weaknesses compared to the pass, which is around 20th. They've allowed 15th most fantasy points to running backs. Their games just sometimes tend to be a little less fun than we'd hope. But like I've already said, I think that Raiders stacks around Aiden O'Connell, Brock Bowers, Jacoby Myers, or even throwing in guys like Alexander Mattison are all viable this week. So if I'm expecting that, then it makes sense to be a little bit exposed to Kendre Miller.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the final kind of enabler that I'm intrigued by, AD Mitchell. I've said all year, his underlying numbers when he's been on the field have been ridiculous. He's hardly played any snaps. He's not been able to get on the field, but when he's been on the field, the Colts have forced the ball to him. Alec Pierce is out.
No,
Last week he
he's
ran.
not.
Is he not? He's playing.
He's cleared concussion protocol.
Oh, well, there we go. My numbers are out. But last week he played 55 of 62 snaps. The problem was that the Colts only had 14 pass attempts. They ran the ball. Could we see a world Joe Flacco under center? Maybe we force the ball. Passing game's a little bit more excited. Or if Anthony Richardson plays again, do we see the teams load the box and maybe we get one deep shot to AD Mitchell? At
Yeah,
2,200, are you interested?
yeah, and I'm interested regardless of whether Alec Pierce plays, because the Giants are so poor at defending the ball deep. We saw the Ravens absolutely capitalize against them. We've talked about it over the last couple of weeks. But the Giants recently lost their starting safety, who's a rookie second rounder who's played really well this year. They're beating up all across the defense. They've struggled defending the deep pass all year. So any player who's got a deep A dot, I'm in on this week against the Giants. And I think if you want to take shots at AD Mitchell or Alec Pierce, I think that makes sense in some of the bigger contests. I probably wouldn't do this in the £25 contest if it gets fewer entries. But in the £7.50 over £3 ones, it really makes sense to do so.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I'd also just like to throw out here a couple of cheaper options that I'm also interested. Malik Washington playing a lot of snaps if Jalen Waddle doesn't go live, and then Jake Ferguson. I don't like the player, but at 2,400 as the only warm body in that Cowboys offense, it feels like if you're looking, as Tom talked earlier, potentially some two tight ends lineups. If you want to get really cheap, 2,400 for Jake Ferguson, that feels like pretty good value right there. But that is it. That concludes the Week 17 preview. Remember, if you haven't yet signed up, go ahead and check out Fantasy Game Day. Use code TFS23 for that second free entry. Best of luck this week. And of course, just because your fantasy season finished now, Fantasy Game Day keeps going all the way through Week 18 and the playoffs all the way up to the Super Bowl. So keep it here. We'll keep the content coming to you.